I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, chatting with writers and authors who offer an added perspective for our listeners. This is The Color Between the Lines.
1, 2, 3, 4.
In this edition of The Color Between the Lines, we're talking about dementia and Alzheimer's, and we're speaking with a doctor about this particular subject, and her name is Dr. Macie Smith. She wrote a book called Dementia, a Dementia Caregiver Called to Action. Welcome, Dr. Smith, to the BIN.
Thank you so much for having me, Esther.
Well, this book focuses on dementia, caregiving, particularly Alzheimer's disease, addressing challenges that caregivers have, emphasizing early intervention and comprehensive care. In your research, I'm wondering, did you find numbers as far as the impact on African Americans in the African American community when it came to dementia?
Sure. African Americans are 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, but least likely to be treated early stages. We do know that age is the number 1 risk factor with any form of dementia, but for the Black community, we are in communities where there are food deserts, where there are hospital deserts, where the pollutants are very high, unsanitary and unclean water. And we do know now that approximately 1/3 of the dementias that we do see could possibly be prevented with lifestyle changes. So eating well, exercising, going to the doctor regularly, mitigating those factors that develop into chronic illnesses. But if you're in communities that don't have access to those particular factors, then really your chances of reducing your risk becomes slimmer and slimmer and slimmer.
I know that, we all look at social media here and there and see things. And one thing that had stuck out for me was type 3 diabetes. People are calling it type 3 diabetes. Is there a connection between diabetes and dementia?
It most certainly is. And I'll tell you, I've had people say to me, you should call it type 3 diabetes. Well, I don't call it type 3 diabetes is because they're still researching type 3 diabetes. It is Alzheimer's disease, right? Because of the medical doctor that treated a patient with language deficit, memory loss, and erratic behaviors. But diabetes is one of those contributing factors, one of those chronic illnesses that does increase one's risk of developing Alzheimer's or progressive type of dementia. Let me also say this too, Esther, there are more than 100 causes or 100 types of dementia. Dementia is a group of behaviors or a set of symptoms that a person displays as a result of having a condition impairing their cognitive state. So when you see memory loss and confusion, disorientation, combativeness, inability to use judgment and reason, something is causing that. Alzheimer's disease is the number 1 type or the most common cause. Diabetes increases one's risk, which is why you're hearing the term type 3 diabetes. I don't want it to be a misconception about that, because type 1 diabetes that can be treated, that's typically familial genetics. Type 2 diabetes could possibly even be prevented or could be prevented with lifestyle changes. If a person has a progressive type of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, right now it cannot be prevented, treated, or even slowed.
Wow. Are you finding that, let me go back, because a lot of people may not know who you are. And a lot of times people go into the medical profession or whatever it is that they're doing because they have personal reasons that connect them to it. Do you have a personal story that connects you to the study of dementia?
I do. My grandmother did develop a progressive type of dementia later on in her years, in her 80s. But by that time, Esther, I was already doing the work professionally as a gerontologist. I do want to say I'm not a medical doctor. I am an allied health professional. I'm a licensed social worker and gerontologist, which means I manage the social aspect of the care of seniors. I specialize in that area. I work hands in hand and collaboratively. I have to with the medical profession because I have to communicate back to them what what medications are working, what medications are not working, what changes are happening in the person's behavior. But when my grandma developed it, it was still a sticker shock. It looks totally different when it lands on your doorstep, because now I got to figure out, am I the social worker? Am I the gerontologist? Or am I the granddaughter today? And so I had to help support my dad, who was her primary caregiver. He was the only adult sibling that could provide care, and my sister, who also provided care. So it was the three of us managing it day to day. And so thankfully, I did have the professional experience to be able to guide my family through the disease process, which is one of the biggest reasons why I wrote the book, because I didn't want family members to be in a constant state of crisis. I want to move them from crisis care to compassionate care, and also comfort care in some cases. And so my personal experience drives my professional experience, and vice versa.
Mm. I noticed that in the book you mentioned that women are at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and then also the impact of caregiving responsibilities, seeing that women are often the caregivers
Mhm.
and they become the one that needs to be cared for. Do you find that this is a, a conundrum for most families?
It is. So we know that women are at the epicenter of the Alzheimer's epidemic. One of the most common reasons is because of the stressors. We got to focus on lifestyle. Age is the number one risk factor. Right after that is lifestyle. Then we get into chronic illnesses, environmental factors, and genetics. Genetics is less than 1% of the risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. So we think about women are natural nurturers. So we're going to be dealing with stressors. Sometimes we don't manage stress well. The caregiving group, the largest caregiving group, is female, 60%, but women do have a gene code. It's APOE-4. That particular gene code has been linked to having a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There's APOE 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the problem area. And women do particularly have this particular gene code. It doesn't mean that if you have this gene code that you're going to get it, but it does increase the risk. And because more women have this particular gene code, it puts us at higher risk. So the stressing, the particular gene code, and we think about women, we tend to neglect our health because we're caring for other people. Sometimes in the sandwich generation, our own children, our own husband or spouse, and then our older adult family members. So we don't even recognize the signs that we're dealing with chronic illnesses. High blood pressure is another area that increases the risk. And so, women, we wear a lot of badges, but that's one badge I certainly don't want to wear.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you advise for a family who is dealing with dementia, where they think that their loved one may be going through this, but mama doesn't want to listen to me right now? So then
Yeah.
how do we deal with that? And what would your advice be to um, getting your loved one help and getting yourself additional help, because caregiving is not an easy process?
Right. That's an excellent question. I first tell families, family members, if you suspect something may be going on with your parent cognitively, such as cognitive loss, memory impairment, I would advise you first not to mention it to the person, because the last thing anybody wants to lose is their mind. And remember, I told you age is the number one risk factor. So there's already a fear factor there for that person, but also for the family members. Talk to other family members and friends and people close to that person just to see what they've seen. Compare notes. So if it is now, if it's a concern for you, it is a concern. After you do that, then I would talk with your loved one about their routine medical appointments, because you don't want it to make it seem like it's something out of the ordinary and they're different, right? Everybody forgets things all the time. So you can have casual conversations and you'll be able to determine if they are forgetting more often than they typically do. Like if they're forgetting how to bake a cake, and they bake, as my grandma would call it, sweet bread every Saturday. Now they're using salt instead of sugar, and they're calling you, asking you for instructions, knowing you can't cook. Because if anybody call and ask me for instructions, I know something's wrong because I can't cook. So once you do that, you want to find out when their next medical appointment is, or you can make it without them knowing and say, hey, mom, your medical appointment is next month on the 10th. Ask if you can accompany them on that appointment so that way they can have a second set of ears, not to tell on them or tattle, so that way they can have a second set of ears, because doctors talk fast, they talk over your head. So I want to make sure we got the right information. And you can come with me to my doctor's appointment too. Again, you want to partner with them. Your parents don't need another parent, they need a partner, and that's how you partner in their care. I oftentimes tell families also to ask their loved one if they can be on their HIPAA form, so that way the doctor will provide information to them, because other than that, the doctor will not provide information. Doesn't mean you can't share information. Doesn't mean you can't call ahead of time or call afterwards to share what your concerns are. And I always want to tell family members, and I often do, don't go in with a diagnosis. The doctor is there to provide the diagnosis, not you. Don't say, I think mama got dementia, because they only have 3 minutes in that office. So you just save them 2 of the 3 minutes that they spend, but have them to do blood workup, to do physical examination to establish baseline. And that's what I take families through, Esther, through my book, because these are typical things that you would think that a doctor would do. But if they're not a geriatrician, and even if they were, they may not go through all those steps, because when we think about the medical profession, they may have 1 chapter on geriatric care and maybe 2 paragraphs on Alzheimer's and dementia care. And so it is it's quite important for family caregivers to be up on the knowledge when it comes to aging in general, and then dementia competent practices. Information truly is currency along the journey.
Mm. I guess we're running out of time, so I want to give you a final word on what you want people to take away from this, and perhaps anything that, a good point that you want to make before we close.
Yeah, I want to say, simply because your loved one may be forgetting here or there, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's dementia. It could be something treatable. I outline a list of treatable conditions that look just like dementia that could be treated, but you have to relay that to the doctor. And then if your loved one does have a diagnosis of dementia, the very first thing you want to ask the doctor is, what type of dementia is it and what's causing it? And then you want to get my book to be able to help build your team. Build your team, better understand how to communicate with the person, and how to also keep your emotions in check. Because as caregivers, we go through a lot of different emotions. And I say to you that it's okay to go through these things and to feel these things, but I'm going to tell you how to manage it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Macie Smith, for joining us on the BIN.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of The Color Between the Lines. The book is called A Dementia Caregiver Called to Action. I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network.